The one question that broke Piers Morgan. Ladies and gentlemen, rationality rules. I've been on a rationality rules binge. My buddy Stephen Woodford, he always has a great way of seeing things, but I've reacted to Piers Morgan debating atheist Richard Dawkins and other people, Neil deGrasse Tyson, and you can tell Piers Morgan is an apologist for not only Christianity, but in a sense, the entire world view that supports it. And so in much the same way, you kind of have to dissect this stuff, realizing there's an interconnectedness often beyond just the belief in Jesus or the belief in the Old Testament or New Testament, but an entire worldview and perception that is around that is affected by all these things. There's a big web of ideas. So in this video, it appears this girl is going to tear him a new ass. And so we're going to have to dissect this together. I hope that you enjoy these. If you do, subscribe to our MythVision Reacts channel, like the video, subscribe, and share it. Let's grow this thing together. I'm really excited to see what happens to Piers. I never watched the Jubilee show with the Piers Morgan. There have been a few that I have watched. I did watch some of the Alex O'Connor one. The problem with doing these specific reactions is if you play too much of, you have to really be careful how much you play of Jubilee before they try to demonetize you. I'll tell you, I've done it before, and they've shut down live streams because these videos are being played from Jubilee, and Jubilee censors that stuff, or at least YouTube censors it on behalf of them. So let's see what happens in this, and I'm excited.
They do. Even movies like Barbie, I'm slightly left. I think masculinity has never changed. All that's changed is the interpretation of it.
In one breathtakingly confident sentence, Piers Morgan just defeated his own argument. He is trying to claim that masculinity is a fixed, eternal truth, while simultaneously admitting that our understanding of it changes completely depending on where we live. It is a moment of total philosophical incoherence. He's essentially saying the thing hasn't changed, only everything about how we practice the thing has changed.
Okay, this is interesting because background on me, I am the son of a retired Special Forces Green Beret who was in the 7th group, who's Billy Badass, Halo Master. I mean, this guy was literally alpha, right? What they like to say, alpha, and then there's beta. They use this language. My dad was like the peak alpha, you know, absolute killer badass. And I was raised that way, and that's been my mentality my whole life, right? Is to be alpha, to be badass, to go to the gym, to be his peak performance, to try, you know, all of that shit. And then you start reading a lot more about history, and one of the things growing up, for example, my dad was definitely not a fan of gay relationships, men with men, things like that, right? There's a whole system built into this, and that's all soft and mushy-gushy. However, when you do study history, you'll find some of the most badass people, kick-ass people, literally behaved and did practices that you would say soft and effeminate, or oh, that's totally not masculine. And it's like, bro, what? Here we go. Let's see what happens. But I like how Steven says, like, he thinks it's this eternal thing, that masculinity is this eternal thing it's the same in all cultures. And it's like, no, but let's see what happens.
The interpretation of it.
And this accidental self-own is just the crack in the dam. What we're about to see is a man realizing that he cannot answer the question in front of him, leading to moments of deflection so clumsy they become accidental comedy.
What's that got to do with them being masculine?
Why hello, my fellow apes. I hope you are well. Today, we're breaking down Piers Morgan's appearance on Jubilee Surrounded, where he faced off against someone named Kyla. And the reason we're watching this isn't just because Piers gets frustrated. It's because Kyla traps him with a single devastating historical question.
This is why I constantly come back to this. Historical data, like researching this material, whether it's outside the Bible or inside the Bible, is necessary to understanding. You can really get people when you know the actual facts and not just, or at least know the history or the source material better. And that is something that we need to do better of if we're going to combat a lot of these ideas, instead of just throwing out their generic, critiques, or even not using historical data, allowing the opponent to act like they know, name-dropping sources as if they know. Now, you should know those sources that are name-dropping and catch them. But even looking at this image, right, on the screen that he's playing right now, this painted image, you can see men hugging each other, dancing. They're almost nude, it seems.
Regarding Spartans and Athenians. You're going to see Piers realize that if he answers her question honestly, his entire premise collapses. So instead, he uses every trick in the book to ensure that the conversation happens on his terms, not hers. Put simply, frame control. So we're going to track that one unanswered question throughout this exchange. We'll count the dodges, we'll analyze the escape tactics, and ultimately, we'll see how Jubilee's own editors had to step in to expose him. It starts right here with the claim that builds the trap he's about to walk into.
My first surrounded claim is that masculinity has never been toxic.
So there's the claim on the table. Piers Morgan, a man who's made a career out of being the loudest person in the room, steps into the circle to defend a claim that is absolute, provocative, and, as we're about to see, intellectually impossible to defend. Unless you cheat, of course. Masculinity has never...
Unless you cheat. Look, Steven keeps catching these guys cheating every single time. That's what they do. They know how to deflect. They do this debate stuff 24/7, so they know how to get out of a moment when they're really caught. They get caught.
Been toxic, he says. Not rarely, not often misunderstood, but never. It is a universal negative claim. And anyone who's ever taken a Philosophy 101 class knows that universal negatives are incredibly difficult to maintain because all it takes is a single contrary example to shatter the entire structure. Now, before we get to the mechanics of how he defends this, or rather how he avoids defending it, we need to appreciate the setting. This is Jubilee surrounded. It is a gladiator pit. The format itself favors the aggressor. It favors the person who can dominate the conversation and hold control, simply because one side will always get voted out. This is where nuance goes to die. But every once in a while, someone genuinely brilliant steps into the ring. Enter Kyla.
1 second. How do you do? I'm Piers.
So I guess where I want to kind of start is talking about masculinity. So I view this, do you think that this is like socially emergent, I imagine, to some degree?
Right out of the gate, Kyla is trying to establish a shared reality. If Piers admits that masculinity is socially emergent, meaning that it's constructed by society, shaped by culture, and changes over time, then his claim that it has never been toxic becomes impossible to defend. If society builds masculinity, and societies have built terrible things, slavery, fascism, segregation, then it stands to reason that a society could build a toxic version of masculinity. But if he grants this premise, the game is over before it begins. So, how does he answer the question? Does he engage with the concept of social emergence?
Do you think that this is like socially emergent, I imagine, to some degree?
Well, I think the truth about the whole toxic debate about masculinity is it's a completely new phenomenon. Before, about 30 years ago, nobody ever used that phrase. It's only really in the last 10 years it's suddenly been...
According to Coopers, the concept of toxic masculinity is used in academic and media discussions to refer to aspects of hegemonic masculinity that are socially destructive, meaning misogyny, homophobia, and violent domination. Even if that's not a term that was used, let's say, till recently, that's probably been around for quite some time. I mean...
amplified and used for absolutely everything.
Notice how he doesn't even glance at the question. He treats it like something foul, catches a whiff and bins it immediately. Instead, he pivots to a meta-commentary about the phrase toxic masculinity. This is the first trick of frame control. Ignore the concept, attack the terminology.
It's a completely new phenomenon.
And in doing so, Piers commits a category error. He's confusing the linguistic category with real-world existence, suggesting that because the label is new, the phenomenon must also be new. Honestly, it's like arguing that gravity didn't exist before Newton named it. But Piers is just warming up, because he now launches into his favorite tactic, the Gish Gallop. Named after the creationist Dwayne Gish, this involves drowning your opponent in a torrent of weak arguments and half-truths, overwhelming their cognitive load. It exploits Brandolini's law. The energy required to refute bullshit is an order of magnitude greater than the energy required to produce it.
Right.
Throw enough mud at the wall and your opponent spends all their time cleaning up instead of making their own point.
It's only really in the last 10 years it's suddenly been amplified and used for absolutely everything. So I thought it might be useful to just start with something that Chris Williamson, you may know him, great guy, and he came on my show recently. And he said that all the following things have been blamed on toxic masculinity.
Okay, before we let him roll, just look at his source. He cites Chris Williamson, a podcaster and former reality TV star, as his primary reference. No offense to Chris, but this is a comically obvious appeal to false authority. In a debate about sociology and history, citing Chris Williamson is the intellectual equivalent of citing Joe Rogan to disprove evolution.
If evolution is real, and if there is this constant, I don't know.
It is absurd on its face.
Oh my God.
But Piers uses this authority to unleash a deluge of nonsense.
Chris Williamson, you may know him, great guy, and he came on my show recently. And he said that all the following things have been blamed on toxic masculinity in the media in the last year and a half. Gang violence, climate change, the financial crisis, Brexit, the election of Donald Trump, not wearing a face mask, eating meat, physical fitness, fast food, capitalism, communism, hip-hop, smelling of Axe body spray, being stoic, risk-taking, religion, but also secularism and atheism, playing board games, being interested in cars, and saying hello or have a nice day.
Do I
What?
Do I need to point out the obvious? No one thinks that saying
That's so
hello
dumb.
or using deodorant is toxic. If anything, deodorant tends to deal with a lot of toxic smells. But I digress.
Brother,
And of course,
That's
the list
funny.
contains logical contradictions: religious and atheistic, capitalist and communist. This would discredit any serious argument immediately, but that's the point. This isn't a real list, it's a prop. Piers isn't trying to prove anything. He's trying to make the entire topic look ridiculous. What we're seeing here is an appeal to ridicule via a straw man. He's using Chris's misrepresentation to make the argument easier to attack, and presenting it as so absurd, it's not worth serious consideration.
And truth be told, if there's anybody out there that is offended by, I don't know, being polite or hey, have a nice day, being, you know, like that, or any of the things he's listing that way, they're really an odd, strange, overly exaggerative person within the people who might be a group of people who do think there's toxic masculinity. So, like, not everyone needs to agree. This is the other problem, is I find that, like, oh, there's a person in that group that goes way too far or is too over the top. They do not set the rules for everybody who finds there are problems with these kind of issues in the world. And I hate to see that, but, like, if one or two people are spoiling it for everyone, don't throw everyone out because of the one or two people. Recognize that there's going to be nuance within each category of group of people. I think that that's important.
Remember, this is his response to Kyla's question about whether masculinity is socially emergent.
Do you think that this is like socially emergent, I imagine, to some degree?
He never answered it. Instead, he forced her into new terrain entirely. On the topic of framing, this one stumped me. Trump says Venezuelan
You're so good at those ads, man. Steven's great with those ads. All right, here we go. Ground news.
screen. Your subscription supports this channel and helps you spot the spin. Thanks.
And saying hello or have a nice day. So I have already committed at least one crime because I've already said hello to you.
That's
So
true.
my point being,
I'm actually really offended by that,
this
too.
Kyla laughs. She has to. If she responds by pointing out the dishonest framing, she looks humorless. She becomes the triggered leftist that Piers' narrative requires. So she plays along.
I'm actually really offended by that, too.
It's a smart de-escalation, but it also gives Piers the time to cement his straw man.
I'm actually really offended by that, too.
Sorry?
I said I'm actually very offended by that, too.
No, the thing is, I think the point I would make is, I think in a time when young men in particular, I've got 3 sons from 32 to 24. I think we've got to a weird place where they feel like they are the most downtrodden, picked upon people in society.
Having ridiculed the opposing view, Piers now claims the moral high ground. He is the defender of the weak. This is crucial because he has now established the filter through which everything Kyla says will be interpreted. If she critiques masculinity from this point forward, she's attacking downtrodden young men.
I think we've got to a weird place where they feel like they are the most downtrodden, picked upon people in society, with good reason in many cases. And a lot of it is down to this, where they don't know what masculinity is. My argument is, I don't think it's ever been toxic. What's happened is you have men behaving badly, but you also have women behaving badly, and no one calls that toxic femininity.
Well, I actually do call it toxic femininity. I think when you look at, I do.
Kyla lands a small but significant hit. Here's his attempt to use whataboutism. What about?
That's so. It is funny because the list he used. If you wanted to say, well, who would be offended by the list that Piers Morgan gave, might be someone she would consider as toxic femininity. I mean, like, so yeah, like. Anyway, let's hear what Stephen says.
Women behaving badly assumes that Kyla will defend women or deny the existence of female toxicity. The obvious implication is that a double standard exists, and if Kyla accepts this frame, it will mark her as a hypocrite. But she sidesteps the trap entirely.
I actually do call it toxic femininity. I think when you look at...
You can hear Piers's response. He wasn't expecting consistency. He was expecting an ideologue. Now, notice what Kyla does with this momentary opening. She tries to get back to the foundation.
When you look at, I do. When you look at like gender studies and philosophy on this, right? We use this term called masculinities and femininities because we understand that like the samurai era of masculinity looks very different than maybe the knights of the round table and whatnot.
This is brilliant. She's introducing the concept of masculinities, plural. Why is this so important? Well, if there is only one masculinity, then it is a monolith, an objective standard you measure a person against to decide if they're man enough.
We use this term called masculinity.
And by the way, it would be interesting, I don't know if they get into the biblical masculinity, but there's some obvious like beard requirement type, gird up your loins like a man in the book of Job, God says, and answer me, right? That gird up your loins sounds almost to me like grab your cojones, grab your nuts and stand up like a man and answer me like a man. Like even God practices masculinity when he's like engaging with Job and stuff. It sounds like a dude with a dude in the locker room getting, hey, you know what? Come here, boy. You know, that kind of stuff. There's a lot of that kind of framed within the Bible. Go figure. And it'd be interesting if that was brought up, right? Ancient Israelite kind of masculinity in society, and then compared to, samurai and round table and various other types of masculinities.
Masculinities and femininities.
But if there are masculinities, plural, then it becomes a menu, a collection of behaviors exhibited by different cultures that we can examine and choose from. The samurai code of honor? Interesting. Victorian emotional repression? Maybe less healthy. And by comparing samurai to knights of the round table, she is choosing examples that are historically undeniable and politically neutral.
I really, really appreciate her doing that too. Again, if you go to Bible, David, his relationship with Jonathan is questionable. There are some scholars who look at this and think that there might have been a homoerotic relationship between King David. And anyone who knows the story, David was a badass young boy, kills Goliath. He's a warrior. He does things for King Saul like, hey, you want to marry my daughter? Go get me 100 foreskins. He comes back and gets 200 foreskins of the Philistines. This guy's a ruthless warrior, a combat veteran. Yet he's in love with Jonathan, and it looks like a homoerotic relationship. Well, he would be peak performance masculinity, but then also effeminate when it comes to his relationships with another man. And like, whoa, that was masculinity. But, it is ambiguous language. So some will argue, no, he was just best friends with him. Of course. But they kiss each other on the lips, of course. They make, they're naked together in covenant. They do covenant. There's a covenant relationship they make that is nude, fully nude. And there are scholars who highlight this looks very much like Gilgamesh and Enkidu from the older Mesopotamian epic, which, may have influence there. Who knows? But generally speaking, is that masculine? I mean, it's biblical, man after his own, God's own heart, that kind of stuff.
Well, at least today.
The like samurai era of masculinity looks very different than maybe the knights of the round table and whatnot. So we understand that masculinity has somewhat morphed and shifted. And in every form of these masculinities or femininities, there are unhealthy elements to each of them. Could you grant me that?
Could you grant me that, she pleads. It's a humble request for a tiny patch of common ground. She is asking, can we agree that things change and sometimes have bad parts? If Piers is honestly tracking the argument, he'd say, sure, some elements can be negative. Cultures are different. But Piers isn't here to engage. He's here to disgrace the woke.
Weak, whiny, woke wastrels.
Granting her premise, even a single historical fact, would mean conceding that her argument has merit. He'd lose control of the frame.
And in every form of these masculinities or femininities, there are unhealthy elements to each of them. Could you grant me that?
Well, it depends what you mean. I mean, what do you think masculinity is?
Again, he refuses to answer directly, instead deflecting with a question of his own. Suddenly, Kyla is the one on trial. She has to present a definition for his approval.
What do you think masculinity is?
This is yet another move to control the frame. You see, the person asking questions runs the interview. The person answering is the subject. Piers is an interviewer by trade. He knows that if he stops asking questions, he loses power. So he doesn't answer her. He demands a definition, one that he'll reject before she's even finished.
What do you think masculinity is?
In our society, I think masculinity...
No, not in your society. Just generally, what is it?
Stop. Rewind.
In our society, I think masculinity...
No, not in your society. Just generally, what is it?
This is really quite insidious. Piers demands that Kyla define masculinity, and she begins exactly as she should, defining it as something relative to society.
In our society...
This is, for what it's worth, the nuanced academic way to define a social construct. You define it by its context.
But, I mean, again, even in language, right? Language has this kind of social and also very time-stamped kind of meaning often. We thought gay was happy 150 years ago. It wasn't same-sex relationships. It was just happy. And then eventually this definitional term switched over to where it no longer is used that way in any cultural context today. And so does the word mean the same thing for all time? No. The same could be said about the traits of masculinity or whatever it might be.
Piers blocks this immediately. He rejects the very premise of her definition before she can even finish the sentence.
No, not in your society. Just generally.
He wants her to define it just generally. Appreciate how rigged this is. Piers insists that she define masculinity as a universal eternal constant. The very thing she is arguing it isn't. So, put bluntly, Piers is insisting that she adopt his worldview in order to even speak with him. He is the bouncer off the club of this conversation. And he's telling her that she can't come in wearing those shoes.
No, not in your society. Just generally, what is it?
Yeah, in North America, we would broadly view it as like...
Well, hang on, you can't just say North America. Masculinity is a thing. It's not like territory specific. It has become that way with the toxic element.
Well,
but actual masculinity, when it was first devised as a word, it's not an American thing, it's a global thing.
There it is, the platonic ideal, the divine form. Piers believes that there is a pure, global, actual masculinity that exists outside of time and space, floating in the ether, untouched by history or culture. But really, I mean, being a man in 13th century Toshima involved different expectations than being a man in a Nordic raiding party, or a monk in 12th century Tibet, or a tech CEO in modern America. Look, to claim otherwise is to deny the entire history of human civilization. You have to be profoundly ignorant. But Piers,
and that's exactly what he is. But also, it's interesting how is it Kyla? Kyla's like really trying her best to like get him to understand. No, it's really not. It's really not just this universal thing that is easily to just categorize. I mean, how do you define that universally? Like it's really strange. Jesus himself, like, what made him so masculine? What made him so masculine? I mean, it would be cool if Piers Morgan gave the definition. If the first person came up and said, define what you believe masculinity is. And then, get his definition and then go, well, here's my definition. And then now compete with definitions maybe or something. I don't know. I'm just thinking out loud. But like, Jesus was not a warrior. He was not out here using a sword trying to like fight. And as far as the text goes that we have, right? He's kind of turn the other cheek pacifist soft guy who's saying, hey, you know, don't fight, don't do any of that. God's going to step in and do that. If you think it takes a tough masculine man to get his ass whooped and then killed and hung up on a cross instead of fighting, okay, I guess then that's masculinity, and we shouldn't be fighting in these wars. And all the things that Israel, like for example, Piers does his shows on Israel defending itself. No, they should turn the other cheek and just, you know, get killed or whatever in his mind, right? He won't do that. He won't recognize that this falls apart at Jesus, and I know he's a believer in Jesus. He's said on record he's a Christian. So
Says it with so much confidence.
It's not an American thing, it's a global thing.
Okay then, Piers has blocked her definition, rejected her context, and retreated to a mystical claim of global masculinity. Kyla realizes that he simply won't let her use a definition that isn't his. So she shifts tactics. If he won't accept a definition, maybe he'll accept a history lesson.
It's not an American thing, it's a global thing.
Do you think that Athenian masculinity and Spartan masculinity were the same in the Greeks?
That right there is the silver bullet, the perfect question to puncture Piers' fragile understanding of masculinity.
Yeah.
It's concrete. It's not about feelings or society generally, but two specific groups of people. It's historical, relying on records rather than speculation.
Yep.
And everyone, and I mean everyone, even people who only know history from the movie 300, knows the answer. The Spartans were militaristic, austere, communal, and obsessed with physical prowess. The Athenians were democratic, philosophical, artistic, and mercantile. Their versions of how to be a man were radically, famously different. They fought wars over these differences. Intentionally or not, Kyla has led Piers straight into a double bind. Piers has two options. He can admit that they were different, which forces him to admit that masculinity...
But he doesn't know the history of the Spartans or the Athenians. Come on.
He is socially constructed and collapses his never toxic claim, or he can claim that they were the same, which would be historically illiterate and make him look foolish. So what does he do?
Do you think that Athenian masculinity and Spartan masculinity were the same in the Greeks?
I think masculinity has never changed. All that's changed is the interpretation of it.
That's right. He chose to be historically illiterate and to look foolish. Piers is trying to separate the essence of masculinity from the practice of masculinity. He's saying that the thing itself is eternal, like gravity. But here's the thing. Gravity doesn't change based on interpretation.
That's why I brought Jesus up to the table, because it's like, if you look at his actions, was he a masculine man or was he a feminine? I mean, his favorite, you know, when he talks about marriage, right? We just did this with Charlie Kirk and others. The marriage idea that Jesus brings in one man, one woman. In that context, he praises the eunuch above that. The guy who chops his balls off for God. Is that masculine? I mean, I doubt it. But it depends on whose masculinity you're talking about, because in philosophy and the growing trends of the time of ascetic thought and thinking, sure, you could be totally masculine and do that thing. But today, no, it may not be so masculine. It's like, who's the one setting the rules here?
Gravity pulls you down, whether you're a Spartan or an Athenian.
I think masculinity has never changed. All that's changed is the interpretation of it.
And
ladies and gentlemen, we're going to end there and we're going to pick up where we left off. I hope you're enjoying these. Look, I'm going to react to stuff that isn't just biblical, not just Old Testament, New Testament. I'm going to react to things like this because this takes a little logic and there's history lessons involved. There's all sorts of great stuff that Steven's doing over there at Rationality Rules. Be sure to subscribe to him, subscribe to us, like the video, share it, and comment your thoughts down below. What do you think about the universal Platonic idea that masculinity is the same everywhere, or is it very culturally distinct? Maybe there's common traits in many of them, but that doesn't mean that they're universally the same everywhere else. And so I'd like to hear from you, your thoughts. What do you think? In the comments down below. Until next time, see you then.